Do14 is on the posterior midline, below the spinous process of C7 in a depression. Bladder 11 is 1.5 cm lateral to the posterior midline, below the spinous process of T1. Going to find the inferior border of T1 and come directly lateral to it on the height of the paraspinal muscle. Bladder 29 is level with the third sacral foramen. 1, 2, 3. 1.5 cm lateral to the posterior midline. Bladder 31 is within the first sacral foramen. Bladder 32 is within the second sacral foramen. Bladder 33 within the third sacral foramen. And bladder 34 within the fourth sacral foramen. Bladder 54 is on the buttock, 3 cm lateral to the sacral hiatus. Typically, if you put your hands on the sides of the buttock, it is midway between the sides and the gluteal fold at the midline. Kidney 18 is level with ren 11, 0.5 cm lateral to the midline, 3 cm superior to the centre of the umbilicus. Pericardium 1 is 1 cm lateral and slightly superior to the centre of the nipple, in the fourth intercostal space. The root of the breast typically lies in the fifth intercostal space, palpating up 1 intercostal space so that I'm in the fourth, for pericardium 1. Ren 12 is 4 cm superior to the centre of the umbilicus on the midline. Gallbladder 23 is found in relation to gallbladder 22. It's 1 cm anterior to it, but still in the fifth intercostal space. To find that 1 cm anterior, find the midline and the lateral extremity of the acromion and divide that 8 cm down to find your 1 cm and put it forward anterior to gallbladder 22 and then palpate into the fifth intercostal space. Liver 13 is located just anterior and inferior to the free end of the 11th rib. To locate the free end of the 11th rib, palpate up the lower margin of the rib cage till you get to the first free floating rib, which is the 11th. This point is never inferior to the umbilicus and never posterior to the mid-axillary line.
Do20 is located in relation to the midpoint between the glabella and the occiput. Place the heel of your palm on the glabella and the occiput. Fold your fingers around the skull to find the midpoint. Do20 is located 1 cm posterior to that midpoint. It typically lies in a nice dip. There are several other nice dips slightly further back, which are other do points, so don't be tempted to go further back than 1 cm posterior to that midpoint. Gallbladder 6 is located 1/4 distance between gallbladder 7 and stomach 8. Gallbladder 12 is found just a few fen anterior and inferior to the extra point peaceful sleep. To locate gallbladder 20, palpate up the groove in between the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius muscles. As you get to the base of the occiput, you will find a nice depression. Gallbladder 20 is in the centre of that depression.
Pericardium 6 is on the flexor aspect of the forearm. It's 2 cm proximal from pericardium 7, and it's in between the two tendons palmaris longus and flexor carpi radialis. Heart 1 is in the centre of the axilla. You need to locate this point by abducting the arm. This brings the pectoralis major muscle into relief. The point in the centre of the axilla is posterior to this pectoralis major muscle, but not on the torso. It's where the arm and the body join. Heart 5 is on the flexor aspect of the forearm. It's 1 cm proximal to heart 7, on the radial side of this flexor carpi ulnaris. Heart 7, which is at the flexor aspect of the wrist joint, at the proximal border of the pisiform bone, the radial to this flexor carpi ulnaris tendon. In order to bring this tendon into relief, if you get the patient to put their thumb and their little finger together, that will bring that tendon up. And just relax. Articulate the wrist and pop your point in.
Large intestine 11 is located at the midpoint between lung 5 and the prominence of the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. Typically, this is at the end of the transverse cubital crease when the arm is fully flexed. Large intestine 14 is located on a line joining large intestine 11 to large intestine 15. It's often described as being 3/5 of the distance between large intestine 11 and large intestine 15, but this isn't always very accurate. The best way to find it is to have a person adduct their arm against pressure and then palpate down until you find a nice depression on the inferior aspect of the deltoid muscle. It's important to realise that when the arm is relaxed, this point isn't at the exact tip of the deltoid, it's slightly anterior and slightly superior on a line joining these 2 points.
Gallbladder 30 is in the posterior lateral aspect of the hip. It's at a junction from the anterior 1/3 and posterior 2/3 of a line taken from the prominence of the greater trochanter and the sacral hiatus.
Stomach 36 is located approximately 13 cm superior to the prominence of the lateral malleolus on the anterior border of tibialis anterior. The easiest way to find it is to palpate down the tibial tuberosity. Find the base of the tibial tuberosity and move slightly laterally until you fall into a nice dip on the anterior border of tibialis anterior. This point is also 3 cm inferior to the inferior border of the patella. Stomach 44 is located half a cm proximal to the web margin between the 2nd and 3rd toes. This point should fit nicely into the flare of the base of the proximal phalange of the 2nd toe. Gallbladder 39 is located 3 cm superior to the prominence of the lateral malleolus. It's in a groove in between the lateral crest of the fibula and the peroneal tendon. Get your patient to avert their foot against resistance to reveal the peroneal tendon. Be sure to locate this point in the groove between bone and tendon, not posterior to the tendon. Kidney 2 is located distal and inferior to the tuberosity of the navicular bone. To find this bone, place your finger on the medial malleolus and then move down and slightly anterior until you come to a very prominent bony lump. If you come too far forwards, you will fall onto a different bone, the cuneiform bone, but it doesn't stand out so much. When you find this bony lump, mark your point, kidney 2, just distal and inferior to it. Spleen 6 is located 3 cm superior to the medial malleolus, half a finger breadth posterior to the medial crest of the tibia. Be sure not to place this point actually on the bone.